The dawn of civilization, 10,000 to 3500 BCE, long before the monumental pyramids of Egypt, the classical columns of Greece, or the efficient roads of Rome. The first civilization arose in a land defined by its hydrology. This region, whose name Mesopotamia means between the rivers in ancient Greek, was cradled between the Tigris and Euphrates. These formidable waterways flowed from the mountains of eastern Turkey to the Persian Gulf, depositing rich, fertile alluvium across the plains of what is now modern Iraq. On these fertile plains, humanity first aggregated into urban centers, developed systematic writing, codified laws, and began the sustained contemplation of the cosmos. The fundamental patterns of organized urban life emerged from this crucible. This history spans a vast arc from the 10th millennium BCE, when the first settlements appeared following the last glacial maximum, to 539 BCE, when Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon. In this period, rulers built empires of mud, brick, and bronze. Scribes pressed the indelible, wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform into clay tablets, and architects raised ziggurats to symbolically bridge the terrestrial and divine realms. Their records, preserved in humble clay, have demonstrably outlasted many far grander stone monuments. The initial chapter of civilization, encompassing the fundamental transition to sedentary life, began in the Fertile Crescent as the ice receded and humans established the foundations of organized society. Chapter 1. The Foundations of Organized Society. c. 10,000 to 3500 BCE, as the last ice age waned, roughly corresponding to the 10th millennium BC. The climate of Southwest Asia began its profound shift towards warmer, wetter conditions. The climatic constraints that had dictated human potential for millennia gradually loosened. In the hills and valleys surrounding the twin rivers, small bands of nomadic hunter-gatherers observed a transformative ecological phenomenon: the prodigious growth of wild wheat and barley. Having spent countless generations pursuing migratory herds and gathering seasonal flora, these early peoples carried their scant possessions and moved with the rhythms of nature. Yet, in this changing environment, they began to establish prolonged residence in areas of food abundance. The earliest semi-permanent settlements were modest clusters of round huts constructed from reeds and mud, documented at sites such as Tel, Muribet, and Abu Huraira in northern Syria. Archaeological evidence from these locations substantiates the shift towards sedentary life. While still hunting gazelle and gathering wild pistachios, the inhabitants occupied the same location season after season in the Jordan Valley. One settlement achieved unprecedented scale. Jericho, arguably the world's oldest continuously inhabited town, arose approximately 11,000 years ago. Its inhabitants constructed formidable stone walls, evidence not merely of habitation, but of the earliest known communal defense and sophisticated engineering. Further east, Çatalhöyük in Anatolia developed another remarkable communal form. Here, people constructed their mud-brick dwellings in such close proximity that streets were absent. Residents accessed their homes through apertures in the roof, navigating the settlement across the rooftops like a complex. Organic structure, the true societal transformation, however, was quietly unfolding in the agricultural sphere. Through meticulous observation and selective cultivation, these nascent farmers began the process of domestication. They favored wild grains with larger seeds and husks that did not easily shatter. Over successive generations, wild grasses were transformed into cultivated wheat and barley. Concurrently, Animals that were once hunted became objects of pastoralism. The fierce aurochs, the wild ancestor of modern cattle, were gradually brought into human control, followed by sheep, goats, and pigs. The domestication of animals ensured a reliable source of meat, milk, and hides, mitigating the inherent uncertainties of the hunt. This agricultural revolution diffused gradually along the fertile arc of land, the Fertile Crescent, from the Persian Gulf up through the river valleys and around to the Mediterranean coast. The transformation was not instantaneous, but a diachronic process unfolding over centuries. The implications were profound. For the first time, human communities could consistently generate a food surplus. This surplus was the necessary precondition for specialization. Individuals could now dedicate themselves to non-food production activities, leading to the emergence of potters, weavers, and toolmakers who exchanged their crafts for staple foods. During the 6th millennium BCE, another pivotal innovation appeared: pottery. While simple containers had been fabricated from stone, wood, and woven reeds for millennia, the firing of clay created vessels that were both lightweight and watertight. This development facilitated longer-term food storage and the easier transport of liquids. As crops became more productive, early farming communities encountered a distinct challenge in the lowland alluvial plains: limited rainfall. Yet, the annual flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates deposited rich silt, ideal for cultivation. These resourceful peoples began to excavate channels to direct and manage this water to their fields, the genesis of irrigation, agriculture. By the early 5th millennium BCE, small hamlets had expanded into larger agrarian settlements across the southern plain, the land that would later be called Sumer. Sites like Eridu and Uruk began as modest farming communities but would eventually grow into fundamentally new entities. True cities, the management of water became central to these developing societies, coordinating the construction and maintenance of irrigation systems required organization and leadership beyond the nuclear family unit. Communal projects to build canals and dikes fostered increasingly complex social structures. With settled agriculture came new imperative needs. Food surpluses required protection from raiders and methodical management for potential lean times. Religious beliefs evolved to address the inherent uncertainties of farming life. The forces governing rain, flood, and drought were personified as powerful deities requiring elaborate propitiation. Temples, initially simple shrines, grew more elaborate. Roughly 6,000 years ago, some communities were constructing dedicated monumental buildings where specialist surly priests performed rituals to ensure good harvests. These temples functioned not merely as centers of worship, but as redistribution centers, where grain was collected and dispensed. Consequently, social stratification intensified. Those who controlled the surpluses gained executive power. Those who interpreted the will of the gods gained religious authority. The relative egalitarianism of hunter-gatherer bands gave way to hierarchical communities with discernible, emerging elites. Technological tools evolved concurrently. Copper, first used for beads and decorative items around the 7th millennium BCE, began to be shaped into practical implements. A millennium later, metal workers discovered that alloying copper with tin created bronze, a material harder and more durable than pure copper. The Bronze Age had commenced. Trade networks expanded dramatically. Highly prized obsidian from Anatolian volcanoes traveled hundreds of miles, and lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan found its way into temple ornaments in the southern plains. By the end of the 4th millennium BCE, in the burgeoning city of Uruk, a truly momentous development occurred, driven by the escalating complexity of managing temple resources. Administrators began using clay tokens to represent quantities of goods. These tokens eventually evolved into stylized marks, pressed into clay tablets, the world's first writing system. Initially, these marks were simple pictographs drawings representing the items being counted. A drawing of an ox meant an ox. Gradually, however, the system became more abstract, transitioning to represent sounds or syllables rather than solely objects. This marked the definitive birth of true writing. By the dawn of the 4th millennium BC, the fundamental architectural components of civilization, as scholars define it, were firmly in place. Cities with thousands of inhabitants, specialized crafts and professions, monumental architecture, complex religious institutions, social stratification, long-distance trade, written records. The stage was now set for the next critical phase, the emergence of the Sumerians and the world's first true urban civilization. Chapter 2. The Urban Revolution of c. 3500 to 2300 BC. The southern alluvial plain, where the twin rivers meandered toward the sea, became the heartland of humanity's first true civilization. Here, amidst marshy deltas and intensely fertile fields, a remarkable culture created an unprecedented network of true city-states, each housing thousands of inhabitants within massive mud brick walls. Uruk, arguably the most magnificent of these early urban centers, underwent a rapid expansion after 3500 BCE. Archaeological excavations estimate that the settlement eventually covered nearly 2 hectares and may have housed up to 50,000 people at its zenith. Massive defensive walls enclosed distinct neighborhoods of densely packed houses, workshops, marketplaces, and administrative buildings. At the heart of Uruk stood its crowning achievement, the White Temple, majestically perched atop a towering platform. This structure, an early prototype of what would later develop into the classic ziggurat, stood as a testament to both sophisticated engineering prowess and profound religious devotion. Other urban centers flourished across the landscape. Ur, nestled near the ancient coastline, now far inland due to millennia of silt deposition, became a bustling port city. Eridu, which local tradition claimed to be the oldest city, housed the temple complex dedicated to Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water. Lagash, Kish, Nippa, and Umma grew into powerful city-states, each possessing a distinct political identity, ruling dynasty, and patron deity. These cities were not simply large villages. They represented a fundamentally new form of human organization. Unlike earlier settlements, they supported a diverse array of specialists, not just farmers, but metallurgists, potters, weavers, merchants, administrators, soldiers, and priests. The development of monumental architecture permanently altered the landscape. By 3000 BCE, the city of Ur featured a temple platform exceeding 11 meters in height, necessitating the use of more than 720,000 baked bricks for its construction. The impetus behind these monumental construction projects reveals another key societal innovation: institutionalized leadership. Early governance appears to have been a form of shared authority, with councils of elders and assemblies of citizens holding significant power. However, religious leaders, who controlled the temple's vast resources, gradually assumed greater authority, evolving into priest-kings, ensi in the local tongue. These early rulers derived their legitimacy from a special mediatory relationship with the gods. In times of crisis, a temporary military leader might be appointed a lugal, literally, big man. These lugals sometimes successfully parlayed their emergency powers into permanent kingship, gradually supplanting the authority of the priests. By 2900 BCE, kingship had become firmly established in most cities of the region. Religious beliefs permeated every facet of life in these early city-states. The pantheon included countless deities, with each city elevating its patron god or goddess to special prominence. The people conceived of these gods as anthropomorphic, vastly more powerful than humans, but sharing similar emotions and needs. Temples functioned as the gods' earthly dwellings, where priests performed elaborate daily rituals of food, drink, and incense to sustain the divine residence. The cosmos was envisioned as a flat disk with the earth at its center, covered by a vault of heaven. Unlike later civilizations, there was no promise of a paradise for the virtuous. The afterlife awaited everyone as a gloomy, shadowy half-life, one of the most far-reaching innovations of this culture. Cuneiform writing continued its dramatic evolution. What began as simple pictograms for accounting gradually developed into a comprehensive writing system capable of expressing abstract concepts and recording spoken language. By 2500 BCE, scribes utilized approximately 600 different signs to write not just lists of goods, but complex letters, legal documents, medical texts, and sophisticated literature. Literacy remained the privilege of a specialized class of scribes. Young boys, primarily from wealthy families, began rigorous training in the Ida Bar tablet house, or school, around age 7. The Sumerian language, related to the later Semitic or Indo-European language families, stands as a linguistic isolate. Literature, preserved on thousands of clay tablets, reveals a rich cultural tradition. The Epic of Gilgamesh, originating in tales about a historical king of Uruk around 2700 BCE, follows its hero's poignant quest for immortality, ultimately concluding that death is humanity's inevitable fate. This civilization also created the world's oldest known law codes, though the famous Code of Hammurabi would come later. Fragments of legal texts from around 2400 BCE, such as the laws of Uranama, demonstrate a society already concerned with formalizing rules for commerce, property, and criminal justice, establishing monetary compensation for injuries rather than the principle of physical retribution. Lex talionis, economic life, revolved around the temples and palaces, which controlled vast agricultural estates. These institutions developed sophisticated accounting systems, tracking income, expenditures, loans, and interest payments. Private commerce also flourished, with merchant families conducting trade expeditions to distant lands. By the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, trade networks extended to the Indus Valley civilization in modern Pakistan, the Iranian highlands, and Anatolia. Technological innovation accelerated. The potter's wheel, appearing around 3500 BCE, revolutionized ceramic production. Wheeled vehicles, first evidenced around 3200 BCE, transformed transportation and warfare. Mathematical knowledge grew sophisticated, developing a sexagesimal number system based on units of 60, whose legacy endures in our 60-minute hours and 360-degree circles. The social hierarchy grew more complex as cities expanded. At the top stood kings, priests, and nobles. Below them ranked professionals, scribes, and master craftsmen. The bulk of the population consisted of ordinary laborers, with slaves at the bottom, often a temporary status caused by debt or wartime capture. Notably, women held more rights than in many later civilizations. They could own property, operate businesses, and serve as priestesses. The city-states existed in a state of near constant competition and conflict. Disputes over water rights, boundary lines, and trade routes frequently escalated into warfare. This internal rivalry left the politically fragmented region vulnerable. By 2334 BCE, the political landscape of Mesopotamia stood poised for a massive transformation. The independent city-states, despite their sophisticated culture and technology, were about to be overshadowed by an individual who would create the world's first true empire. Chapter 3. The Akkadian Empire c. 233–42154 BCE. To the north of the ancient city-states of Sumer, another culture had been developing in the central plains of Mesopotamia. These people spoke a Semitic language distinct from the linguistic isolate of their southern neighbors. Though influenced by the achievements of the Sumerians, they maintained their own identity, centered around their main settlement, Akkad, whose exact location remains unknown to modern archaeologists, but was likely near present-day Baghdad. From this city would emerge a figure whose ambition redefined the political landscape of the ancient world. Sargon, whose name means the true king in his native Akkadian language. The origins of Sargon are shrouded in legend. Later, tradition claimed he was a foundling set adrift on the Euphrates, akin to the biblical Moses. Whatever his true background, Sargon began his career as a cupbearer to the king of Kish. Around 2334 BC, he seized power in Kish and swiftly turned his attention southward toward the wealthy cities of the Sumerian plain. Sargon's chief rival was Lugalzij, the ruler from Uruk, who had briefly united many southern cities. The clash represented a confrontation between two distinct models of state organization. Lugalzij sought to maintain the traditional system of paramount city-states, while Sargon envisioned a revolutionary, unified territorial state under direct central control. In a series of decisive military campaigns, Sargon defeated Lugalzij and the allied forces of the southern cities. The victorious northern ruler then instituted a radical new approach to governance. Instead of allowing conquered cities to maintain autonomy under local dynasties who paid tribute, he removed their rulers and installed loyal officials, often members of his own family, as governors. This administrative innovation marked the definitive birth of the world's first true empire, a multi-ethnic state with centralized authority extending over a vast territory at its height. The Akkadian Empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. To bind this diverse realm together, Sargon implemented several unifying strategies. He established his native Akkadian language as the official imperial language for administration. He standardized weights and measures to facilitate taxation and trade. He created a standing professional army, reportedly numbering 5,400 men, who were loyal to the ruler rather than to local cities. Sargon ruled for approximately 56 years, providing the stability necessary for imperial institutions to take root. His successors faced the constant challenge of maintaining control over diverse territories. Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, proved to be the most capable ruler after the founder. He crushed a massive rebellion of several major cities, demonstrating military skill and ruthlessness. After these victories, Naram-Sin took an unprecedented step. He declared himself a god. Previous rulers had claimed divine appointment, but Naram-Sin had his name written with the divine determinative in cuneiform. Official art depicted him wearing the horned crown traditionally reserved for deities. This elevation of the ruler to divine status reflected both the extraordinary power of the imperial office and, perhaps, a strategy to strengthen loyalty in a multi-ethnic realm. Naram-Sin's famous victory steely depicts him as a heroic figure, physically larger than his soldiers and trampling defeated enemies. Despite these impressive achievements, the imperial edifice began to crack. Maintaining control over such vast territories was increasingly difficult. Provincial governors developed their own power bases, and the costs of constant military campaigns strained the economy. External pressure intensified, particularly from the mountain peoples known as the Guti, who raided from the Zagros Mountains after the death of Naram-Sin. His son, Shaka-Lishari, inherited these mounting problems. Though capable, the centrifugal forces pulling at the empire proved too strong. Provincial areas broke away, external enemies pressed in, and economic troubles deepened. This period of confusion lasted until approximately 2154 BC, when the last nominal ruler of the dynasty was overthrown, bringing the Akkadian Empire to its end. The cultural impact of this first empire fundamentally outlasted its political structures. The fusion of northern Semitic and southern Sumerian traditions created a blended Mesopotamian culture that would influence the region for centuries. Crucially, the imperial ideal, a unified territorial state under a single ruler, became a recurring aspiration for ambitious leaders, providing the blueprint for future empires across the ancient world. Chapter 4. The Neo-Sumerian Revival, c. 2112 a 2004 BC. Following the collapse of the world's first empire, a period of fragmentation ensued across the lands between the rivers. The mountain-dwelling Guti seized control of northern territories, while southern city-states regained independence under local leaders. This interlude of disunity lasted for nearly a century. The Guti, described in contemporary texts as the dragon of the mountains, maintained loose control over the north, but never established sophisticated administrative structures, relying instead on raids and tribute collection. Meanwhile, in the south, a remarkable cultural renaissance began taking shape. Freed from northern control, yet drawing on the integrated traditions developed during the Akkadian era, the ancient cities experienced a creative rebirth. Scholars call this phase the Neo-Sumerian period, marked by the revitalization of older cultural forms within new political structures. Among these resurgent southern centers, the city of Lagash achieved particular prominence under a ruler named Gudea. Though he never attempted to build a large territorial state, Gudea presided over a flourishing of arts, architecture, and religious expression. Dozens of statues depicting this pious leader have survived, showing him in poses of devotion. Crafted from hard diorite stone imported through extensive trade networks, Gudea's inscriptions detail elaborate temple construction, projects, and his profound religious piety. While Lagash flourished culturally, a different city soon emerged as the political center of a renewed territorial state. Ur, an ancient settlement near the Persian Gulf, became the seat of a new dynasty founded by a ruler named Ur-Nama around 2112 BCE. This capable leader successfully drove out the Guti from the north and reunited much of the former imperial territory. Though on a somewhat smaller scale, unlike the previous empire builders, who emphasized military conquest and centralization through force, Uranar established his reputation primarily as a lawgiver and builder. Thus, the law code bearing his name, though only partially preserved, stands as the earliest known systematic legal collection in history, predating the more famous code of Hammurabi by more than 3 centuries. This pioneering legal text established fixed monetary penalties for various offenses, moving away from physical retribution toward standardized compensation. It notably protected the less powerful widows, orphans, and the poor from exploitation by the wealthy beyond his legal innovations. Uranar embarked on an ambitious building program throughout his domains. His most visible achievement was the construction of monumental ziggurats, massive, step-sided temple structures that rose dramatically toward the heavens. Chapter 4. The Neo-Sumerian Revival Cant. The best preserved example of this monumental architecture, Atior featured 3 distinct stepped levels, reaching an estimated height of approximately equals 30 meters, and was accessed by triple staircases. These imposing structures, visible for miles across the alluvial plain, served as potent symbols of renewed cultural confidence and religious dedication. The sophisticated administrative system developed during this period represented a highly effective blend of centralized state control and regional governance. Provincial governors (ensi) oversaw local affairs, while a complex bureaucracy managed the state's extensive collection and redistribution of resources. Royal officials conducted systematic tours of inspection, and messengers utilized designated routes between administrative centers, ensuring efficient communication across the realm. Under Uranar's son, Shulgi, who reigned for an extraordinary 48 years, the state reached its organizational and economic zenith. This long-reigning monarch implemented numerous institutional innovations that solidified central governance while pragmatically respecting local traditions. He established a standardized calendar, reformed weights and measures, created a royal messenger system with fixed posting stations, reorganized the tax system, and standardized scribal education. Shulgi also meticulously cultivated his image as an ideal ruler through symbolic acts, notably claiming to be a champion runner who personally carried ritual offerings between major temple cities, emphasizing his unifying role through personal exertion and divine favor. In the later years of his reign, Shulgi followed the precedent established by the Akkadians and declared himself divine, a move intended to create a powerful religious foundation for political unity across traditionally independent city-states. The economic system of this era combined centralized planning with market elements. The state controlled vast agricultural estates, directly employing thousands of laborers, and managed extensive redistribution networks. Concurrently, private merchants conducted independent trade ventures, typically under royal oversight. Culturally, the era saw a profound revival of the ancient Sumerian language for religious and literary composition. Scribal schools flourished, preserving and standardizing traditional texts. An innovative literary form that emerged was the royal love song. Lyrical compositions depicting romantic relationships between the king and the goddess Inanna. These poems, which skillfully fused politics with eroticism, served to reinforce the theological underpinnings of royal authority through divine marriage metaphors. The stability of this Renaissance period began its inevitable erosion under Shulgi's successors. Ibisin, the last ruler of the dynasty, faced mounting challenges. Provincial governors increasingly asserted de facto autonomy, withholding tax revenues and declaring outright independence. Nomadic Amorite groups infiltrated from the west. Most critically, The ancient irrigation systems faced a combination of drought conditions and the cumulative effects of salinization, a process where repeated irrigation in an arid climate leads to salt accumulation in the soil, catastrophically reducing fertility. Grain prices, recorded in contemporary texts, indicate dramatic inflation, suggesting severe agricultural collapse. The final blow came from the neighboring state of Elam, centered in modern southwestern Iran. Around 2004 BCE, Elamite forces, allied with other enemies, captured Ur itself. The city was pillaged, its ziggurat desecrated, and Ibusan was taken captive to Elam, marking the fall of the Ur III dynasty. A contemporary lament poetically described the destruction as a divine punishment for human failings. Though politically devastating, the collapse did not erase the cultural achievements of the Neo-Sumerian Renaissance. Its legal concepts, administrative techniques, and architectural forms continued to shape Mesopotamian civilization for centuries, setting the stage for new political configurations. Chapter 5. The Old Babylonian Empire c. 1894 to 1595 BCE. After the demise of the Ur III dynasty, political power in Mesopotamia fragmented among numerous competing city-states. This period of division, lasting nearly a century, saw the emergence of regional powers such as Isin, Larsa, Ish, and Mari. A significant demographic shift accompanied this fragmentation. Semi-nomadic peoples, speaking a West Semitic language, established ruling dynasties in several key cities. One such Amorite leader, established himself in a previously minor settlement called Babylon around 1894 BCE, located strategically on the Euphrates River. This city, whose name meant Gate of the Gods, was initially unremarkable. However, it would gradually rise to unprecedented prominence. For its first century under Amorite leadership, Babylon remained a minor regional power. The geopolitical situation shifted dramatically with the accession of the sixth ruler of the dynasty, Hammurabi, in 1792 BCE. This monarch would rule for 43 years, establishing Babylon as the dominant center of Mesopotamian civilization through military prowess, administrative genius, and meticulous image building. Early in his reign, Hammurabi focused on internal development, reinforcing infrastructure, and cultivating relationships with neighbors. Around the middle of his reign, having consolidated his base, he embarked on a series of military campaigns that systematically eliminated rival centers of power, Larsa, Ishnana, Mari, and even Ashur, uniting virtually all of Mesopotamia under a single rule for the first time since the Akkadian Empire. Unlike earlier conquerors, Hammurabi presented himself as a conservative restorer of ancient traditions. His royal inscriptions depicted him as a shepherd appointed by the gods to bring justice to the land. This emphasis culminated in the Code of Hammurabi, inscribed on a 2.25-meter tall stone stele. Containing 282 legal provisions, the code revealed a complex, class-based society. Penalties varied based on the social status, aristocrat, commoner, or slave of the parties involved. While the principle of lex talionis, an eye for an eye, applied between equals, the code repeatedly emphasized protection for the vulnerable to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. Hammurabi was equally active as an administrator and economic manager. His government maintained detailed records of production and resource distribution. Surviving letters reveal his hands-on approach to governance, personally addressing complaints and micromanaging projects. In religious matters, he elevated Babylon's patron deity, to a position of prominence in the regional pantheon, symbolically mirroring Babylon's new political supremacy. When Hammurabi died around 1750 BC, his unified kingdom soon began to fracture. Revolts erupted in southern cities, and external threats, the Sealand dynasty in the extreme south and mountain peoples from the Zagros range gradually eroded central control. By 1700 BCE, much of the south was lost, though Babylon itself remained prosperous and culturally dominant. Babylonian culture during this period synthesized older traditions, and the Akkadian language of Babylon became the international diplomatic lingua franca of the Near East. Intellectual achievement flourished, particularly in astronomy and mathematics. Babylonian scholars developed the first predictive mathematical models of planetary behavior and worked with an advanced sexagesimal numeral system that allowed for complex calculations, including solving quadratic equations. The end of the dynasty came suddenly in 1595 BCE. The Hittites, an Indo-European speaking people based in central Anatolia, launched a long-distance raid of unprecedented scale under King Murzili I. The Babylonians were utterly unprepared. The Hittites breached the city's defenses, plundered its treasures, and overthrew the ruling dynasty, though they quickly withdrew to their homeland. Into the resulting power vacuum stepped another group, the Kassites. Chapter 6. Kassite Rule and Regional Powers, c. 1595 to 1155 BCE, following the catastrophic Hittite raid. A new group, the Kassites, assumed control of Babylon. Originally mountain dwellers from the Zagros, the Kassites had gradually integrated into Mesopotamian society. Seizing the opportunity, a Kassite leader claimed the throne, establishing a dynasty that would rule for centuries, marking a period of remarkable stability and cultural continuity. Unlike previous conquerors, the Kassites fully embraced the cultural and religious traditions of Babylon. They adopted the titles, gods, and administrative practices of their predecessors. The political landscape of the Near East had transformed into what historians term the Club of Great Powers, a system of balanced rivalries and alliances that included Kassite, Babylon, the New Kingdom of Egypt, the Hittite Empire, and the Mitanni Kingdom. International relations were governed by established diplomatic protocols, with royal letters, Amarna letters being a key archive, written in Akkadian, cementing its role as the diplomatic language of the era. Kassite monarchs ruled through an administrative system that featured distinctive innovations in land management. They granted large estates to loyal supporters, documenting these awards on Kudaru stones, boundary markers, which served as official legal records and feudal grants. Intellectual achievements were significant, particularly in the systematic organization of knowledge and astronomical observation. Scribal schools compiled comprehensive lists, surly attempts at encyclopedic organization, covering everything from divine names to legal precedents. Astronomical tracking of celestial movements became increasingly precise, initially driven by divinatory purposes, but accumulating datasets that would eventually enable mathematical prediction. The zodiacal system began taking recognizable form during this era. The stability of the Kassite regime eventually succumbed to external pressures. The balance of power began unraveling around 1200 BCE, a period known as the Bronze Age collapse, when a series of dramatic upheavals devastated the Near East. The Kassite kingdom initially proved resilient. It was fatally weakened by increasingly destructive raids from Elamite forces from southwestern Iran. The Elamite king, Shutruknahunt, led a devastating campaign around 1160 BCE, capturing important cities and carrying off cultural treasures, including the stele of Naram-Sin and the Code of Hammurabi. This Elamite invasion fatally weakened Karsite control, allowing a native Babylonian dynasty, the Second Dynasty of Isene, to seize power around 1155 BCE, ending for centuries of Kassite rule. Despite the political transition, the Kassite period left an enduring legacy of cultural development and a systematic organization that provided a resilient framework for Babylonian civilization to survive the ensuing Iron Age. Transformations. Chapter 7. The Assyrian Empire. c. 1300 to 609 BCE. While Babylon enjoyed centuries of relative stability under Kassite rule, a formidable power was developing in the northern reaches of Mesopotamia. In the land watered by the upper Tigris, the Assyrians crafted a society defined by military prowess, administrative efficiency, and ruthless determination. Originally a trading city-state centered around Ashur, their experience as middlemen gave them broad knowledge that later served their imperial ambitions. The transition to an expansionist power began gradually during the 14th century BCE. Early rulers, like Ashur-uballit, IC 1363 to 1328 BCE, asserted independence and began intervening in regional politics. Military expansion accelerated under subsequent rulers, extending territorial control and establishing provinces. While other regional powers collapsed during the Bronze Age disruptions around 1200 BCE, Assyria weathered the storm. The true turning point came during the reign of Tiglath-Pileser, IC 1114 to 1076 BCE, an energetic ruler who conducted campaigns in all directions, reaching the Mediterranean coast. His inscriptions established the twin motifs that would characterize Assyrian kingship, warrior, and hunter. The foundations for extraordinary imperial expansion were laid during the 9th century BCE, driven by rulers like Ashurnasirpal, 2883 to 859 BC. He established a new capital at Kalku, modern Nimrod, and constructed a magnificent palace decorated with stone reliefs that served as powerful propaganda, visually narrating military conquests and royal hunts. Military innovations transformed the Assyrian army into an unstoppable force. Iron weapons, specialized units, charioteers, cavalry, archers, and siege engineers, and meticulous logistics provided a technological and organizational advantage. Administrative systems matched this military sophistication. Conquered territories were organized into provinces, and a network of roads, way stations, and messenger systems facilitated rapid communication. Perhaps most notorious was the calculated use of terror as a political tool. Royal inscriptions and palace reliefs explicitly depicted extreme punishments, flying, impalement, and mass executions intended to discourage resistance. The policy of mass deportation moved conquered populations throughout the empire to disrupt local identities and prevent future uprisings. The empire expanded dramatically under Tiglath-Pileser III, 745 to 727 BCE, a usurper who implemented sweeping administrative and military reforms. Under him and his successors, notably Sargon to Sennacherib and Esarhaddon, the empire reached unprecedented size, eventually encompassing most of the Middle East, from western Iran to central Egypt. This vast territory incorporated diverse environments and populations, presenting enormous administrative challenges that the Assyrians attempted to manage with ruthless efficiency. The geopolitics of empire. Assyria and Babylon. The relationship between Assyria and Babylon critically illustrates the evolution of imperial strategy. Early Assyrian monarchs treated Babylon with calculated deference due to its ancient cultural and religious prestige. Tiglath-Pileser III took the traditional approach of being crowned separately as king of Babylon under a distinct throne, name a practice maintained by his successor, Shalmaneser V. When Sennacherib grew frustrated with repeated Babylonian rebellions, often supported by Elam, he adopted a radical reversal of policy. In 689 BCE, he ordered the complete destruction of Babylon, demolishing temples, destroying irrigation systems, and carrying the sacred statue of Marduk off to Assyria as a hostage. This unprecedented sacrilege, however, proved counterproductive, generating religious horror both regionally and within Assyria itself. Sennacherib's assassination in 681 BCE was widely interpreted as divine punishment for this act. His son, Esarhaddon, immediately reversed this policy, ordering the full reconstruction of Babylon as a primary royal act. This pragmatic ruler recognized that ideological alignment and religious respect were more effective tools of control than brutality. Esarhaddon successfully maintained distinct cultural identities for Assyria and Babylonia while holding both under unified control, and in 671 BCE he achieved the conquest of Egypt, extending the Assyrian Empire to its greatest territorial extent. The final major Assyrian ruler, Ashurbanipal, 668 to 627 BC, presided over the empire's cultural and territorial peak. Notably, he boasted of his literacy and scholarly abilities. Under his patronage, the library at Nineveh was established, collecting 30,000 clay tablets encompassing literary, religious, and scientific works, an invaluable collection preserved ironically by the very destruction that soon engulfed the empire. Collapse of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Despite outward appearances of invincibility, the massive empire faced mounting structural problems. Controlling vast territory required immense resources, and constant warfare strained manpower and economic sustainability. Subject populations harbored deep resentment toward Assyrian rule. Ashurbanipal's death around 627 BCE exposed the empire's fragility. Succession disputes weakened central authority, coinciding with mounting external threats. Babylon, under a Chaldean dynasty led by Nabopolassar, declared independence in 626 BCE. Crucially, Nabopolassar formed an alliance with the Medes, a powerful Iranian kingdom. This Babylonian-Median alliance launched a direct assault on the Assyrian heartland. Ashur fell in 614 BCE, followed by the decisive capture and sacking of Nineveh in 612 BCE. By 609 BCE, Assyrian independence was completely extinguished. The fall of Assyria was as dramatic as its rise. The capital cities were swiftly reduced to overgrown mounds. The deep hatred engendered by Assyrian imperial practices was reflected in contemporary prophetic descriptions of Nineveh's fall. Nevertheless, Assyria left an enduring legacy. Its imperial systems of governance, road networks, and through the preservation of texts, its cultural and literary archives provided models for subsequent empires. Chapter 8. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, 162-6539 BC. From the ashes of Assyrian domination arose a revitalized Babylonian state, creating a final, magnificent chapter in Mesopotamian civilization, the Neo-Babylonian or Chaldean Empire. Its foundation was laid by who consolidated control over the south and through the alliance with the Medes, led the campaign that destroyed Assyria. His son, Nebuchadnezzar II, became the defining figure of this era, ruling for 43 years 605 to 562 BCE. He secured the western territories of the former Assyrian Empire, extending Babylonian control through Syria and Palestine. His fateful siege of Jerusalem in 587 BCE resulted in the destruction of the Hebrew temple and the exile of the Judean elite to Babylon, a pivotal event in Jewish history. Having secured his borders, Nebuchadnezzar devoted vast resources to monumental construction that transformed Babylon into the largest and most magnificent city of the ancient world. Massive new walls encircled an urban expanse of over 850 hectares. The city featured wide processional ways paved with limestone and decorated with glazed brick reliefs of lions and dragons. Most spectacular was the temple complex dedicated to Marduk, featuring the colossal ziggurat, likely the inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel, the royal palace complex, which Greek tradition claims included the famous, though archaeologically elusive, Hanging Gardens. One of the seven wonders of the ancient world, matched the temples in grandeur. Intellectually, the Neo-Babylonian period saw significant advancements, particularly in astronomy. Court scholars refined observational and mathematical techniques for predicting celestial events, primarily for religious purposes, omens, but establishing a foundation for later scientific astronomy. Nebuchadnezzar's death in 562 BCE revealed a critical weakness: the absence of stable institutional structures for succession. After a series of short reigns, Nabonidus assumed the throne. Nabonidus generated increasing internal opposition due to his singular devotion to the moon god Sin, which alienated the powerful priesthood of Marduk. More controversially, he spent 10 years of his 17-year reign in the Arabian oasis of Tama, leaving his son Belshazzar as regent in Babylon. Chapter 9: The Persian Conquest, 539 BCE. Meanwhile, a new power was rising to the east. The Persians, led by Cyrus II the Great, having overthrown their former Median overlords. Cyrus had rapidly consolidated control over the Iranian plateau and Western Asia. His imperial strategy was characterized by a revolutionary policy of cultural and religious tolerance, allowing conquered peoples to retain their customs and religious practices, focusing instead on ensuring loyalty and tribute. As Persian forces approached Babylonian territory in 539 BC, they encountered a deeply divided society. Persian forces under General Gobryas conducted a brilliant maneuver, diverting river waters to enter Babylon beneath its massive walls. The Nabonidus Chronicle, a contemporary text, records the city's fall as occurring without battle. Cyrus entered the city not as a destroyer, but as a respectful liberator. His famous Cyrus cylinder inscription portrays him as chosen by Marduk to restore proper worship and governance. Most significantly, Cyrus's policy allowed displaced peoples, including the Jewish exiles, to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples, a decree that established him as a divine agent in Jewish tradition. The Persian conquest marked the end of independent Mesopotamian political systems. Babylon became a wealthy province within the larger Achaemenid Empire, which established a new paradigm of multicultural governance. The empire was divided into provinces, satrapies, utilized Aramaic as an administrative language, and maintained a policy of religious tolerance. The Achaemenid dynasty ruled Mesopotamia until 331 BCE, when Alexander the Great defeated the last Persian king. Chapter 10: The Twilight of Mesopotamia, 539 BCE to 600 CE. The Persian conquest marked the beginning of a long decline for the ancient civilization. Though cities endured, the distinctive indigenous culture gradually transformed under foreign rule. The Persian period, 539 to 331 BCE, was marked by respect for Babylonian traditions. The more dramatic shift came with the arrival of Alexander the Great in 331 BCE. His death in Babylon in 323 BCE led to the city falling under the control of his general, Seleucus, who established the Seleucid Empire, rather than ruling from Babylon. Seleucus founded a new capital, Seleucia, on the Tigris, which became a Greek-style polis. This development initiated a slow decline in Babylon's population as residents migrated to the new city. Under Seleucid rule, a complex Greco-Mesopotamian cultural synthesis emerged. Greek became the administrative language, but traditional cuneiform writing persisted for religious and astronomical texts. Babylonian astronomical knowledge, with its sophisticated mathematical basis, significantly influenced Greek theoretical models of the cosmos. Political control shifted again around 141 BCE, when the Parthians, an Iranian people, seized Mesopotamia. This marked a partial return to Eastern cultural patterns. The Parthian period saw the final phase of cuneiform writing. The latest known cuneiform astronomical text dates to 75 CE, signaling a decisive break in cultural continuity. During this time, the Jewish community in Babylon flourished, laying the groundwork for what would become the Babylonian Talmud. The final major imperial transition occurred when the Sasanian Persians overthrew Parthian rule in 224 CE, establishing a more centralized Iranian state. Under Sasanian governance, 224-651 CE, Zoroastrianism received strong state support, and Ctesiphon, near Seleucia, flourished as the region's primary city. The legacy of the Neo-Babylonian Renaissance and the subsequent imperial periods, however, ensured that Mesopotamian intellectual and cultural achievements, from astronomy to legal concepts, were preserved and transmitted to the emerging civilizations of the West and the Islamic world. Chapter 10: The Twilight and Enduring Legacy, 539 BC, present. The period following the Persian conquest initiated a prolonged twilight for the distinct Mesopotamian civilization. The cultural landscape during these final centuries of pre-Islamic Mesopotamia was characterized by extraordinary religious syncretism and diversity. Jewish scholarly communities produced the Babylonian Talmud, completed approximately equals 500 CE, the foundational legal and ethical compilation of Rabbinic Judaism. Simultaneously, Eastern Christianity, the Church of the East, developed sophisticated theological traditions and expansive missionary networks, while Manichaeans and Manichaean missionaries contributed to the theological ferment. However, within dwindling temples, the last priests maintaining ancient Mesopotamian religious practices continued their increasingly isolated rites, their numbers diminishing with each generation. This complex religious structure was decisively transformed by the Arab-Islamic conquests of the 630s and 640s, after the decisive Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in 636 CE. Arab armies gained control of Mesopotamia, which would become the heartland of the Abbasid Caliphate after Baghdad was founded in 762 CE. This new imperial center was constructed just 30 kilometers from the ruins of previous capitals, continuing a pattern of successive urban rebirth under Islamic rule. The region, now increasingly called Iraq, experienced a cultural revitalization, albeit within an entirely different religious and linguistic tradition. The ancient gods, cuneiform script, and ziggurats were largely superseded, yet subtle continuities persisted. Astronomical and mathematical knowledge, refined over millennia, influenced early Islamic science. Irrigation techniques sustained agriculture, and administrative practices informed Islamic governance. The final disappearance of recognizably Mesopotamian cultural traditions cannot be precisely dated. Rather, the civilization gradually diffused its influence, transitioning from direct cultural continuity to indirect legacy. Epilogue: the legacy of Mesopotamia. Modern archaeological excavations, beginning in the 19th century, revealed the forgotten splendor of ancient Mesopotamia, transforming humanity's understanding of its own origins. The enduring legacy of the land between the rivers is profound, resting upon foundational concepts that shaped all subsequent civilizations. Writing: the systematic development of cuneiform c. 3400 BCE established the concept of written communication, the most revolutionary technology in human history for record-keeping, literature, and law. Urban organization. The early cities of Sumer pioneered the organization of complex urban communities, grappling with problems of governance, resource management, and social hierarchy that remain familiar today. Mathematics and astronomy. The sexagesimal system, basic, which continues to define our measurement of time, 60 seconds, minutes, and angular geometry, approximately equals 360 in a circle, originated with Sumerian scribes. Legal concepts. Early law codes, for example. Yonama Hammurabi established the principle that law should be publicly known, consistently applied, and derived from established authority, a concept underlying all modern legal systems. Religious and mythological frameworks. Narratives like the Epic of Gilgamesh and concepts of divine justice and cosmic order influenced subsequent theological thinking throughout the Middle East. For example, the flood narrative, technological innovations, advances such as systematic irrigation, the potter's wheel, metallurgy, and wheeled vehicles fundamentally transformed economic possibilities. The story of Mesopotamia reflects the fundamental nature of civilization, an ongoing flow of influence and adaptation. Its achievements were not isolated events, but the first sustained expression of humanity's capacity for cumulative cultural achievement, setting precedents in statecraft, literature, and scientific inquiry that continue to resonate in our modern world.